Okay, what is up there, YouTube? This is J-Man Time, and today I have yet another video on yet another topic that is barely ever mentioned when it comes to military arms, or in this case, aircraft, used by historical factions. In this video, we're going to go over one of the topics no one has ever talked about when it comes to pre-World War II conflicts, and that is the Air Force of Albania, or the aircraft of the Albanian Air Force that existed during the Italian invasion of Albania in April of 1939. And technically, this was the first true Albanian Air Force that was founded in 1925 and 1928 and was ultimately defeated in 1939 during the Italian invasion of Albania, again in April of 1939. Now, back in 1939, Italy under Benito Mussolini had the bright idea to annex Albania, which was a client state of Italy or had been a client state of Italy for many decades, starting under the rule of Ahmed Zagu, who was the king of Albania at the time, also known as King Zog I. King Zog was originally anti-Italian because of the Vellore War, where Italy tried to annex the Principality of Albania in the early 1920s, but later Albania became more friendly towards Italy in the later 1920s. It was during this time that the first Albanian Air Force was founded. Now, this was not the first true Albanian Air Force. In fact, the Albanian Air Force was founded on paper way back in 1914, back when Albania was known as the Principality of Albania. At that time, the King of Albania, who was actually a German, Prince Wilhelm I, also known as Prince Wilhelm of Albania, actually established the first Albanian Air Force on paper, but this never materialized. In 1914, the armed forces of the Principality of Albania actually ordered 3 Austro-Hungarian Lanner B-1 Model 11 series of armed reconnaissance trainers from Austria-Hungary, but these never arrived as Albania was in turmoil and was later invaded and annexed by Austria-Hungary in 1915, thus ending the potential of starting the Albanian Air Force early in the year of 1914 and 1915, when it was supposed to be founded under the leadership of King Wilhelm I. But in 1922-1925, under the leadership of Ahmed Zog I, the Albanians would start their first true official Air Force. So let's go over the aircraft of the Albanian Air Force that were present during the Italian invasion of Albania in April of 1939. And the first aircraft on the list, and the only true fighter aircraft on the list, are the German-made Albatros L-47s. These were German reconnaissance and fighter aircraft that were built in the year of 1918, 1917, 1918, and were originally used by the Imperial German Air Forces towards the end of World War I. Now, at the end of World War I, when the Germans and their allies eventually signed the armistice, many of these aircraft were either sold to many of the countries that were client states of Germany still. Even though Germany was banned from having an air force, they were still selling a lot of their surplus aircraft that had not been scrapped by the Allies at the end of the war. And some of these aircraft were stripped of their weapons and sold into civilian service, which is what happened with these planes. Albania would order 5 of these Albatros aircraft in the year of 1922, and these would be the first true aircraft to serve in Albania. These aircraft were armed with one 7.92mm German MG-08-15 and one 7.92mm Parabellum MG-14 machine gun in the rear. In the rear cockpit, the speed of these aircraft were 175 kilometers per hour or 110 miles per hour or 96 knots, and they had an endurance of 3 hours and a combat ceiling of 5,000 meters or 16,400 feet. Now, these aircraft were outdated even in the 1920s, as most of the world had already replaced most of their World War I vintage aircraft with newer models being built in the 20s. But at the time, this was all Albania could afford. These 5 Albatros L-45 reconnaissance aircraft from 1918, and they were still in service when the Italians invaded in 1939. Now, according to Italian combat reports from 1939, only 2 of these aircraft were still in service or still in flying condition, with the other 3 being used as spare parts. But these aircraft don't seem to have engaged the Italians at all. In fact, they were captured at the main Albanian airfield in the city of Tirana. Tirana was one of 2 bases where the Albanian Air Force was located. There was a second base in the city of Vlorë, or near the city of Vlorë, and both of these air bases were captured by the Italians in April of 1939, with all of their aircraft still being intact and were grounded either due to a lack of fuel or a lack of spare parts or a lack of pilots. The Albanians only officially had about 7 to 10 pilots maximum at this time in April of 1939, and they only had two functional fighter aircraft, these Albatross L-45 reconnaissance planes from 1918, which were severely outdated by 1939. And if you think these were outdated, you haven't seen nothing yet. Another model of German aircraft that were captured by the Italians in 1939, although these aircraft did not even attempt to take off, were two German-made AEG J2s. The AGE J2 was an armored ground attack aircraft from 1917, and Albania had managed to get two of these aircraft in the 1920s. One was a former military plane that was shipped to Albania, and a second plane, which was completely unarmed, was an AGE J2 that had been rebuilt into a civilian liner by a German aircraft company, a German passenger plane company at that time, and was later abandoned in Albania once that company went out of business in 1929. These aircraft were generally armed with 2 to 6 7.92mm MG08-15 machine guns and one 7.92mm MG14 machine gun in the cockpit. The maximum speed was 150 kilometers per hour, or 93 miles per hour, and it had a range of 375 kilometers, or 233 miles, or 202 nautical miles, an endurance of 2.5 hours, and a combat ceiling of 4,500 meters, or 14,800 feet. And these two aircraft were mostly used as training aircraft for the Albanian Air Force in the 1920s, and by the time of the Italian invasion in 1939, these aircraft were still sitting in their hangar, not being used at all. Most likely, the Albanians had ran out of spare parts for these two aircraft by that point. Another aircraft that was serving as a transport aircraft for the Albanian Air Force were two German-made Junkers F-13s. These were all metal transport aircraft that were originally built in the year of 1919, and Albania managed to get at least two of these by the year of 1925, and they were showcased for the first time in 1929 at an air show that was being held in Albania at the time, during the early days of King Ahmed Zag I. These aircraft were not usually armed, but if they were, they could be fitted with one 7.92mm MG08 machine gun or one MG14 machine gun as optional. The maximum speed was 173 kilometers per hour, or 107 miles per hour. The range was 1,400 kilometers, or 870 miles, an endurance of 3 hours, and a service ceiling of 5,000 meters, or 16,000 feet. And Albania had two of these during the invasion of 1939. These aircraft were normally used as civilian transport aircraft, but they were also used by the Albanian Air Force as transport aircraft for both the Albanian Air Force and the Albanian Army at the time. The Royal Albanian Air Corps and the Royal Albanian Army at the time. And these two aircraft were also captured by the Italians in 1939, in April of 1939, and they were also based at the main Albanian air base in Tirana. And then finally, the most modern aircraft in the Albanian Air Force, an aircraft that was also used as a civilian plane as well, and these were the Italian-made Breda BA-44s. The Breda BA-44 was a biplane transport aircraft originally built in 1934. Only a small number of these were ever built. Only about 6 to 10 of these aircraft were built between 1934 and 1938. These aircraft had no armament at all. In fact, these were just unarmed transport aircraft. Their speed was 248 kilometers per hour, or 155 miles per hour. It had a range of 860 kilometers, or 536 miles, an endurance of 3 hours, and a combat or service ceiling of 5,800 meters, or 19,000 feet. And Albania had 4 of these aircraft. These were originally civilian aircraft. They were being used to transport civilians back and forth between Albania and Italy, but they were also sometimes used by the Albanian Air Force as general transport aircraft for both the Royal Albanian Air Force and the Royal Albanian Army. Later, in 1939, they were captured by the Italians and were actually pressed into service with the Italian Air Force, the Regia Aeronautica, after 1939. These 4 aircraft were later used in World War II as general transport aircraft for the Italian armed forces until they were phased out around 1944 or towards the end of the war in 1945. And that's basically it. These were the aircraft that were captured by the Italians that were serving in the Royal Albanian Air Force, also known as the Royal Albanian Air Corps, in April of 1939, April the 7th to April the 12th of 1939, during the Italian invasion of Albania, one of the conflicts that happened during the buildup of World War II towards the end of the Ajrore era of 1919 through 1939. So what do you all think of these? Which of these were your favorite? Obviously, the Albatross are my favorite because one is kind of hilarious that Albania was stuck using these antique warplanes from the First World War, but it was kind of nice that they still had some kind of an air force, even if there was just 5 old Albatross aircraft from 1918. I also like the AEG J2s because I have never heard of those until doing this video. So what do you all think of this? Please tell me in the comment section below. And until next time, this was J-Man Time, signing off.